Dear friends, Accordia, welcome and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Helena Nolan and I am the Irish Ambassador to Belgium. I'm delighted to introduce this event marking St. Brigid's Day and our celebration this year of the important role of women in science and medicine in Ireland and here in Belgium. As many of you will know, this is our 4th year to host an event for St. Brigid's Day, and we have so many happy memories of our earlier gatherings, held here in the Irish Embassy at first, and for the last 2 years in beautiful Beaux-Arts. We shared a slideshow earlier from these events, and looking back, one of the things that really stands out for me is the energy and the enthusiasm, the buzz and the sheer joy of these occasions when we were all together, as well as how lovely it was hearing from our panelists, but also hearing our participants, hearing you share your own stories and your experiences of St. Brigid's Day traditions and of the women in your lives and in your careers who inspired and encouraged you. I'm really delighted that so many of you have chosen to join with us again here today, and especially to know that there are so many younger people among our participants. We want to encourage that same spirit of community and engagement here today. So please do feel free to join in the conversation by using the chat function to share your greetings and your reflections. And I know some of you have already been doing that. And if then you have a specific question for the panel, please use the Q&A button to ask that question, which our moderator will endeavour to reach. We have, I think, a really great programme for you today, which will include both poetry and song, in addition to our very interesting speakers. Before coming to that, and before I hand over to our moderator, I will just say a little bit about Brigid and the idea behind our embassy's involvement in the celebration of Brigid's Day. Brigid has a fascinating story, both as an early Irish female goddess associated with fertility and the coming of spring, and later as Ireland's only female patron saint. But the common thread running through the story of Brigid is that she's a trailblazer, a true innovator, a negotiator, an empowering female figure. She is always associated with creativity. Her various careers have included beer making, beekeeping. She's been an entrepreneur and a builder, a farmer, a midwife. She's renowned too for standing up to authority, for challenging assumptions and the status quo, and for striving to make things better for others. She is therefore the perfect example of the bold, compassionate, multitasking woman. And so celebrating her and her day gives us the ideal opportunity to focus on the role and contribution of women in all aspects of our society, as well as the coming of the lighter and the brighter days, the hope, the regrowth and the renewal that we all look forward to and truly need at the return of spring. Previously here in Brussels in our celebrations, we have honoured female writers, entrepreneurs, designers, both from history and from the present day. And this year, after a great brainstorming session in our team, we decided to focus on women in science and medicine as something both timely and important. Our one common strand in all of our St. Brigid's Day events has been Antonia Hart, now Dr. Hart, following the completion of her PhD. Antonia spoke here at our very first Brigid's Day event in February 2018 in the Embassy, sharing some of the hidden narratives of early Irish businesswomen and entrepreneurs. And she opened up a whole new world for us. So we're delighted that this year, as our moderator, she will again amplify some more of those stories before introducing our incredible panel of Belgian and Irish speakers. That sense of an unbroken line of female intellect and ingenuity, and the powerful impact of our female role models, both historical and present day, is something I'd really like us all to take away from today, as well as the inspiration and the hope for the future that I think you'll find is exemplified in the beautiful song on which we will end our programme of events. But first, we begin with poetry, and the resonating words of Irish poet Jessica Traynor, who's been setting the poetry world alight since her first collection and who continues to inspire. As many of you will know, I'm a great believer in adding poetry to everything. It seems to me there's little that cannot be improved by the inclusion of a poem, especially one as meaningful and empowering as this one. I hope you will enjoy the poem video entitled A Demonstration, which was first performed by Jessica as a commission from the Irish Writers' Centre for their 1916 centenary programme. And I think that Brigid would approve, as she's also the patron saint of printing presses and of poets. After that, Dr. Antonia Hart will take the screen for her presentation and for the introduction of our brilliant Irish and Belgian panellists. Our Deputy Head of Mission, Aisling O'Leary, will follow the panel event with some surprises for our participants, so please do stay with us for that. And then I'll come back on and join on here again at the end to introduce our specially commissioned song by young Irish singer-songwriter Katie Maye, which I can promise you will be really worth waiting for. So I hope you all really enjoy the programme and our celebration of Brigid in Brussels. Thank you, as always, to our wonderful team at the Embassy for making the magic happen. And I will hand over to them now to roll the poem video. Thank you.
Dr. Kathleen Lin was one of Ireland's great humanitarians. Born in Mayo in 1874, she devoted her life to the care of the sick and for 35 years ran St. Ultan's Hospital. Her connection to the Rising came about through her interest in women's suffrage and her sympathy for Dublin's workers, whom she supported in the Great Lockout of 1913. Made captain of the Citizen Army on Easter Monday, Kathleen had to climb over the high gates in front of City Hall to take up her post under Sean Connolly. When City Hall was captured by the British Army, Kathleen Lin might have escaped because the officer who first encountered her thought she'd been brought in to attend the wounded, but she proudly declared herself to belong to the Citizen Army. Held for 8 days in Ship Street Barracks, Kathleen and her companions were starving, sleep-deprived and lice-infested by the time they were marched to Richmond's barracks and then Kilmainham Jail. Jessica Traynor was born in 1984 and hails from Dublin. Her first collection, Liffey Swim, was published by Daedalus Press in 2014 and was shortlisted for the Strong Shine Award.
What would drive this doctor to jump out of reason and into the fire of rebellion, haunted by skulls that boast through the skin of children, ghosting the alleyways, dying young in silent demonstration? I raise my own demonstration against my limits as woman and doctor. I think of those I've watched dying, praise the mercy of gunfire that scythes through women and children. I number those dead, count their skulls. My convictions temper in the fire and quicklime of what follows. The dying man brought out and shot at dawn, the ever-dying Cuchulainn with his necklace of skulls, all that spitting revolutionary fire. And my part in that demonstration won't be forgotten, but as a woman doctor put down to hysteria or a lack of children. For what are women themselves really but children, living and dying without reason? They say a real doctor might cure me, could measure my skull and tell its emptiness, demonstrate my zeal was nothing but a mindless fire. A rebel's dying stokes the nation's fire, but starving children. Ask this doctor to number our gains in skulls. Expect a demonstration.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Ambassador Nolan. I think you know just how thrilled I am to be back to mark another Belgian Irish St. Brigid's Day with everybody. And wow, what an introduction that poem makes. I mean, it really sets the scene so perfectly for the discussion we're going to have with our panel now and with all the participants in a little while. I was really struck just now by the lines that Jessica Traynor gives to Dr. Lin, which I hope I get them right now, are, I raise my own demonstration against my limits as woman and doctor. And Kathleen Lin really did that. She raised her own demonstration against those limits. And because of it, she's someone whose name has really become part of our national conversation. From calls to have the new National Children's Hospital named after her, to featuring as a character in Emma Donoghue's latest novel, The Pull of the Stars. And there are so many other women in our history who have raised similar demonstrations. Ambassador Nolan just mentioned to me only this morning, Agnes Mary Clark, born in Skibbereen in 1842. She was a self-educated astronomer, and NASA named an indent on the moon after her, Clark's crater. I think it's pronounced Clark, which is fantastic. And Ellen Hutchins, another Cork woman, was a botanist from Bantry. She was only 29 when she died. And Marianne Lee has written a fictionalized account of her life in the novel A Quiet Tide, just published in 2020, last year, by New Island. Now, of course, not everybody who is working in science or medicine is going to be that kind of high profile success. The person whose name is remembered, the person who will appear in novels, the person who is invited onto the news to give their view. Not everyone is going to be that person, and not everyone has to be. But also, not everyone wants to be. And there are so many essential careers which make a difference, but which don't necessarily draw attention. And as a general public in Ireland, in Belgium, all over the world, we've seen some of that work made really visible over the last 12 months. People doing essential work in labs and in wards behind the scenes. And perhaps we have paid a little more attention to that fact lately. And so I thought that rather than picking out one particular prominent woman who made a remarkable contribution, that I would just draw attention to women who made modest but really essential contributions to the delivery, in particular, of healthcare. And as I'm only talking for a few minutes, I'll just tell one story, which is the story of Eliza Jane Bell. And I'll let her stand for the many, many thousands of women like her. Eliza Jane Bell was suddenly widowed in 1872. She was only 28 and she had only been married for 2 years. And when her husband died suddenly, she inherited his business, Butler's Medical Hall in Sackville Street, in the middle of Dublin. Sackville Street now, of course, O'Connell Street. Butler's Medical Hall was a hugely successful business, which had already been going and thriving for over 60 years when it came into Eliza Jane Bell's hands. She wasn't a pharmacist. In fact, I think there wasn't a female pharmacist in Ireland until 1900, so not for another 30 years. But she owned Butler's Medical Hall for 50 years. And during that time, she completely modernized it and developed it into the kind of retail chemist that we're familiar with today, somewhere where you can fill a prescription or get items for your first aid kit. But equally, you might buy a birthday present or a lipstick or any number of little luxuries. And one of the items that Eliza Jane Bell stocked in the shop was a new product for women, cheap, disposable sanitary towels made by Southall's, now part of Smith & Nephew, I think. And they would have transformed the lives of those women who had access to them. An advertisement in the Irish Times told the public that Mrs. Bell was stocking them, as were several of her commercial neighbours in Sackville Street and the surrounding areas, including at least 2 other women. And just thinking about the liberating convenience brought by the availability of those towels brings to mind issues of period poverty, which persist today, and the fact that it wasn't until the early 1990s that sanitary towels were advertised on television in Ireland. That's over 100 years after Southall's first produced their towels, and nearly 100 years since Mrs. Bell had been happy to be advertised in the Irish Times as a stockist. And I think it's a really useful example of the relationship that can exist between research and commercial development and the delivery of a product or a process by an ordinary small business owner. And that process and the communication that surrounds it ends up making a really significant difference to people's lives. So I suppose that's where I'm coming from, thinking about recognizing in our heritage the work of really significant figures like Dr. Kathleen Lin, and also the work of perhaps more ordinary women like Eliza Jane Bell, who put disposable sanitary towels on the shelves of her shop and told the world about it. And so, just bearing the spirit of those women in mind, I think that probably brings me to the right point at which to invite the members of our most distinguished panel to begin their contributions to today's discussion. The panel, as you probably already know, is made up of 3 remarkable scientists. Dr. Anne van der Jeugd, Program Manager of the Leuven Brain Institute at the University of Leuven, Dr. Nora Patton, Aeronautical Engineer and faculty member of the International Space University, and Dr. Ina Prosser, biotechnologist and partner at Fountain Healthcare Partners. So we're going to hear from each panelist before opening up to the question and answer session. And so first of all, I'm going to invite Dr. Anne van der Jeugd to speak. Dr. van der Jeugd is a neuroscientist with a research specialism in memory and what makes the brain vulnerable to neurodegenerative diseases. I hope you'll find that accurate. She has held numerous prestigious awards and research grants, and last year, in 2020, she was awarded the Science Communication Prize from the Royal Flemish Academy of Sciences in Belgium. She is Program Manager of the Leuven Brain Institute, and she's currently President of BWISE, Belgian Women in Science, and we're thrilled that she's been able to make time to be with us today. And Anne, I can see that you have some beer bottles in there behind you, and I believe you make your own beer. So in that respect, you have a lot in common with St. Brigid.
Yes, thank you, Antonia, for the nice introduction, and thank you for having me today. Indeed, I have some other things also in common with Brigid. So I'm actually also a beer maker, as you notice. Last weekend, I made my own Geuze, which is a beer of spontaneous fermentation, very delicious. But I'm also actually a writer. I hold a bachelor in journalism. So those 2 things I have in common with Brigid. Yeah. I'm very happy to be here and to represent BWISE. So BWISE stands for Belgian Women in Science. We are an NPO that wants to promote the position of women in science in Belgium. And we do this in various ways. We have our own unique mentoring program, which is national. And this is something really special because in our mentoring program, we have mentees and mentors, and they come from different universities in Belgium. So we try to pair them. Then we have a Flemish-speaking and a French-speaking person. So it's also good to actually stimulate your language skills. Our mentoring program, by the way, will be launched end of this year. So we will have no openings for mentors and mentees. Yeah, this is something about me. So I'm also the program manager of the Leuven Brain Institute. And this is actually at KU Leuven's University. And today we actually have our own St. Patrick's Day. So I'm very happy to be here and to represent KU Leuven's Leuven Brain Institute, where we gather all the excellent neuroscience research done at KU Leuven. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. So perhaps we will move now on to Dr. Nora Patton. Nora does absolutely brilliant work advocating across many channels for all the STEM subjects. As I mentioned, she's a member of the faculty of the International Space University, and she's a citizen science astronaut candidate at the International Institute of Aeronautical Sciences. Dr. Patton has also written a gorgeous children's book, Shooting for the Stars, which I actually have here. I had to wrest it from the hands of my own daughter, who's 8. She's obsessed with it. And it has actually really nourished her growing interest in space. So I thank you for that. And Dr. Patton is going to share some of her story with us now.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd love to be there with everybody in person, but it's also equally just as lovely to be able to do it virtually and celebrate St. Brigid's Day. And there were certainly a lot of themes and messages that the panel were just speaking about. And so I'd like to touch on a few of those in my own career in space and in engineering. So I was fortunate enough to get to visit NASA when I was 11 years of age. I was still in primary school. I was growing up in the west of Ireland. And really at that time, there was very, very few, if any, visibility of people in general in STEM careers, let alone women in STEM careers. And I often think back to that time of growing up. I was very lucky to get to go back to NASA when I was 15 to Kennedy Space Center, saw the Saturn V rocket, the one that went to the moon in the Visitor Complex, and just absolutely fell in love with space. And like that, I had absolutely no clue how I would pave a career in that sector, but I knew that's what I loved. And I look back on kind of the role models and the visibility of people in the sector at the time. And really what strikes me is that, you go back to the early days in the selection process in NASA. There was the Mercury 7. They were all male astronauts, because at that time, the opportunity for women to become astronauts wasn't there. And so it's really, as I've, grown through my career, that as Antonia mentioned, the work of the people in our heritage. And I got the opportunity to meet Eileen Collins in 2006, and she's a total hero, role model of mine. She was the first female pilot and commander of the space shuttle. And I thought what was really lovely, when she launched to space in 1995 on the space shuttle, she invited the remaining Mercury 13 to her launch. And the Mercury 13 were a group of female pilots who, at the time of the Mercury 7 male astronauts, they also went through some of the same testing and some of the same things that the male astronauts had gone through, and they had come out very well in a number of these tests. And so I thought about this in terms of, the opportunity that I've been afforded now as a woman in this area. It simply wasn't there, 50 years ago. And so I think it's possibly all of these things have fed into why I really enjoy and I really love to do outreach and engagement, and really to try and pave the way for others to follow. So it's not just about visibility, it's really opening those doors. And with that, in 2019, we established the POSSUM 13. So the program, the citizen science program I do, is called POSSUM, Polar Suborbital Science in the Upper Mesosphere. So we thankfully have the acronym. But really the purpose of the POSSUM 13 is to open up doors for young girls to get more involved in space science. And so we have flown experiments designed by young teenagers on microgravity flights. So they've got to design their experiment. It's been tested on board these flights. And so I think, as well as the visibility, I've had such an amazing visibility in Ireland, which I'm so thankful for. It's really about using what we have to really open the doors for the next generation to follow. So that's just a little bit about some of the things that I've experienced. I so welcome questions and comments and thoughts to share with everybody.
Well, I think you're probably going to get plenty of questions. But it's really fascinating to hear you say that that there was such a shortage of role models. And I wonder, for you, Anne, is that something that that you experienced when you were considering a career in science? How did that come for you?
Actually, it goes way back earlier. Before I started to think about science, I read a lot of comic strips. As you might know, Belgium has a large tradition in having comic strips. For instance, we have this Tintin or Kuifje, as you might know. It's always things that they discover. So all these books I have, and you can look on this one page, for instance, we have a male professor here discovering a star. So this is how I discovered first inventions. We have also this Nero strip, and his son actually is Adamar, and he has a PhD. So this is the first professor I saw in a comic book. This little guy here doing tests in the laboratorium. There are so many examples of this. We also have Siska and Wiske. They're on the Antarctic base. Again, here we have Professor Barabbas. And I can go on and on and on. Another comic book, Jommeke. And we also have here a Professor Gobelin. So this is how I actually came in touch with science. And I want to be an inventor myself. So this is how I got into, first I studied journalism because I love writing. And then after that, I studied psychology and actually got my PhD in psychology, not in neuroscience, but I've been working with like neuroscience related research, Alzheimer's fields for 15 years. And beside my research, I actually also combined it with science outreach for children. In 2017, I founded a workshop, a STEM workshop called #The Smell Challenge, in which children can do their own experiment and they have to guess smells blindfolded. And I got awarded my Science Communication Prize for that by the Royal Belgian Academy of Arts and Sciences last year. And yeah, it's something that I like to do also, science outreach for children, to get the message through that everybody can actually be an inventor, not only the male.
And I think that's probably something that we will come back to during the Q&A, the outreach and communication and the encouragement, particularly of younger people to think about science as a career. I'm now going to move on to our last panelist, who is Dr. Ina Prosser. And she's another tremendous advocate for women working in STEM careers. As I mentioned at the start, she's a biotechnologist, but also a venture capitalist. She's a partner at Fountain Healthcare Partners, which is a life science venture capital firm investing in companies in the States, in Europe, in Ireland, working biotech, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices, I think, as well. So hugely important work. She's an honorary member of Women in Technology and Science in Ireland, WITS, which is, I think, quite a nice match to Be Wise, and has been promoting women's access to and leadership in science and technology for the past 30 years. So she has really an extraordinary breadth and depth of experience. And I have to say, it's a real honor that she is here to share some of that with us today. Ina.
And thank you very much. I'm absolutely, like the others, thrilled to be able to take time out and just think about a career in science and the benefits it's brought me, and be able to share some of that with you. So to complement what Anne had said, I really would like to just start a little bit with WITS. So WITS is 30 years old. I was a PhD student at the time. I got involved at the very beginning of WITS. And it was Mary Robinson who threw down a challenge to WITS. She spoke at our first meeting 30 years ago in DCU. And she challenged that history is written by the victors. And therefore, it was incumbent on us to record the feats of women in our field and to celebrate them. So one of the first things that WITS did was to publish book called Stars, Shells and Bluebells, which was biographies, properly edited biographies of women who on whose shoulders we were building our careers across science, across technology, across different areas. And they went back to people like Mary Countess Ross, an early astronomer in her own right, who made many of the observations on the Ross telescope. And then it was people like Mary Maura Bruach, who were out in Dunsink in the observatory, who wrote it. So not only were these sort of historically accurate, but they were also written, each of the biographies, by people who were sort of incumbents of the legacy on whom that work had been initiated. Which was founded by Mary Mulvihill, a very talented science journalist, naturalist, who really made a big point of trying to communicate science in a very enriching way. And her innate curiosity was at the heart of what she did. And WITS has been something I've been very proud to be associated with all the way through. Three sort of areas we've been involved with: recording through Stars, Shells and Bluebells, and then later was Lab Coats and Lace, which not only talked about people like Kathleen Lin, but also Dorothy Price and Brigid Lyons. And they were other women who were really, really powerful in areas like TB management in Ireland, in public health. More of our early chemists, Professor Philbin, Kathleen Lonsdale. And again, these ended up by having proper biographies. People were able to reference them and acknowledge and let them take their place in the history of universities and in the history of departments. And I think universities like DCU have been very proactive in naming buildings behind some of these women. And, that's an area that has been very important to us, as well as plaques been put up. When WITS got involved first, only about 5% of the plaques commemorating where people had been in Ireland were to women. And now it's at least 25%, mostly scientific women from that work. The second thing we've been involved with is our talent banks. And that is at a certain stage, and I see the Breed Horan, I think, is on the attendees too. WITS, about 15, 20 years ago, got very involved in trying to audit a list of peer-reviewed women who would serve on public boards and private boards. Because again, diversity is very important within the leadership sphere. And we still hear today, we looked for a woman, but we couldn't find one, as if we're hiding under rocks. I don't think Brigid would have put up with that nonsense. So one of the things WITS tried to do was to make sure there were women who were ready, willing and able to serve on boards, and to bring the diversity of what maybe a scientific and technical training could bring to a board, not just gender alone, but a diversity of opinion and experience that could be necessary. And that's been important to me in my role as a venture capitalist. And, I think most of us hate being put in boxes. I don't like being put in a box as a scientist. I don't like being put in a box as an entrepreneur. I don't like being put into a box as an engineer or a scientist or a venture capitalist. And the people we invest in as venture capitalists tend to be people who are curious, who are driven, who collect experience, who collect the best people around them. And I think that's very Brigid-esque in how you approach life. So I'm delighted to be here today. Our investments go across Belgium. We're investors in Syndaisy, a cognitive science company up the road in Brugge. And right the way, I had a menopause company that I sold last year to Bayer. There hasn't been a drug approved for symptomatic treatment of menopause in a very, very long time. And women these days aren't willing to put up with inconvenience just because they should, when there's alternatives to getting on with their lives. So my spectrum of a career is something that has been enabled through science.
Wow, thanks so much, Ina. And it's so it's really heartening to hear you talk like that, and also to think that that the work of WITS has been going on for such a long time. That it's that it has been, this has been 30 years brewing to and obviously there are the question of women's involvement spans the whole pipe that people refer to as the leaky pipe, from keeping children's interest going to keeping people committed at and after third level, post PhD, postdoc, but also at board level, in leadership roles. So it's really right the way through that there need to be mentors and supports in place. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, and one of the programs I ran when I was chairwoman was we adapted the Open University program to return women, because when women had taken time out for family reasons, they often, when they decided to go back to careers, they didn't go back to technical careers, and they didn't go back to the same level at which they'd left. So the Open University had a program which was, the content was more applied to the UK. So WITS raised money from Intertrade Ireland, the North-South body, to run that program with the assistance of Engineers Ireland as well, to try and have a structured module, including structured mentorship, where both the mentors and the mentees were trained and negotiated contracts to help bring people back into work. And at that time, it was really a digital divide and a confidence divide. The big issue for women getting back in. And these were women who had been sort of senior leadership in pharma and engineering, as well as in academia. But when they got out, they lost their confidence. And they didn't see themselves as being there. So at that level. So a lot of this was peer-to-peer networking to make people get their self-belief back. Because I don't think their brains had atrophied. It was their self-confidence that had. So a lot of the mentorship challenges were just making people be ambitious enough and to develop the skills and adapt the skills they'd learned when they were out of the workforce. And some of those people have gone on to significant leadership roles, having returned after 10 and 15 years out of the workforce. So that for me is a tremendous sense of satisfaction. And it's lovely to see a lot of these programs end up being reinvented by other organizations. No one organization, be it BWise or WITS, has the answers. I think we're a collective of just trying to move all these things along in our own way.
But that is a very heartening account. And Anne, I think you can probably speak to gender in research as well, can't you?
Correct. It's actually really interesting what you said about the menopause company you sold, because I have a menopause research line myself, because often we see that, for instance, also other drugs are being tested in male. I work on rodents, on mouse, male models only, and then they end up not working in female because our bodies are different, right? Our metabolism works differently a bit. So this is something that I also instigated my students, that we also try to invest more in women-related neuroscience research. Yeah. And also on the second point, I also want to tell here that together with Solvay, company Solvay, we are organizing the Girls Leading in Science contest. It's a contest that the girls from secondary school can participate, and they have to invent something that can actually change the life of people on Earth. It has to be sustainable. And they can win back their first year of university or higher education in a STEM-directed course. So that's really interesting. Something we organize, and it's still open now for... the contest is still open now until the end of this week. So the Girls Leading in Science contest.be. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I can see that there are some questions mounting up in the Q&A. So I'm just going to perhaps turn to some of those so that participants can have an opportunity to get involved. I might start with one for you, perhaps Nora. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to make a hames of pronouncing this name, Kirit Kumar Lathia. And it relates to the difficulties up to now of an engineer being regarded as a man who can repair something. So I don't know. The question is, how are you handling this in Ireland? I've noticed that the best thing is to break this down and to show how IT is so pervasive, and there is nothing to stop women being part of it. I think that's a sentiment that we can all get behind.
Absolutely, yeah. It's interesting. I think you know, there can be at times still this perception of careers, whatever they are, engineering versus, you know, whatever the careers are. I did some digging and some research a few years ago in terms of gendered toys, and you know how that whole evolution was really a financial driven thing for toy companies to differentiate, you know, male and female Legos, for example. And it really doesn't do any favors, you know, to young in society that they're then seeing that on the shelves. This is for boys, this is for girls. So I think you know, that in terms of even when kids are very young and they're seeing that is certainly not a good starting point. But I think equally there are multiple things that feed into perceptions. So it's not just toys, it's the people who influence us at different stages in our lives, whether they're the parents, teachers, all the way up. And so society as a whole, I think, needs to tackle those kind of stereotypes. But yeah, in terms of the engineer being that stereotype, I certainly think it has evolved and it has certainly changed, because there are much more visible female engineers and female scientists now compared to 20 years ago. As you say, there are many amazing scientists, and they're not all on TV, but I definitely think the work that WITS is doing and other organizations like that has certainly helped to bring them to the visible world that they weren't before.
Mm. And there is actually another question in about whether or not you've met somebody who changed your career in science through your life. Is there anybody in particular that you can look back on? I mean, it might not necessarily have been a scientist; it might have been somebody else.
Yeah, like very interestingly, I often show this a picture of my junior cert art project. So you're about 15 when you do 14, 15 years of age when you do junior cert, and mine was all rockets and astronauts and everything space related. And again, going back to what I was saying about, you know, these different people at different stages that pull on us as people and influence us at different stages in our life. My art teacher in secondary school was the loveliest man, and he would come in and he'd say, "What kind of rockets are we building today, Nora?" And he'd be bringing me in art supplies, you know, and really pushing me to follow my interest. And so again, I really think it goes back to even what Aina was saying about every stage in your career you need support. I don't think it matters what level you're at, and I've certainly noticed that in my own career, the people who've pulled me up at different stages.
I like to hear about interdisciplinary approaches. I love that it was your art teacher. There's a question specifically for you, Ina, if you'd like to come back in. It's from Mary McKenna. And she says that she is running a community of early stage but scaling female founders in Ireland called at Awaken Hub. And she is wondering, what couple of key pieces of advice would you give to women who are aiming to raise venture capital investment for the first time and starting out on that journey? And she also thanks you for all your work.
Well, the first thing I will tell is a little anecdote, and it goes across my work in Enterprise Ireland as well as VC. So the moral here, and I'll get it out, is aim high. Because when I was judging grants for Enterprise Ireland and HPSU grants or academic commercialization grants, if it says $500,000 is the maximum of the fund, the women's grants generally will come in at 475,643 pence. You know, it's just very specifically, and the guys will come in with 745,000. They shoot through the limits, they aim high, they ignore barriers. So don't be compliant is my first, they guys, I think, come in expecting to be cut down, expecting to negotiate. So they go in almost like the souk in Marrakesh. higher, whereas women will make their best effort and come in reasonably and will probably deliver within 2 to 3% of that budget. But that whole act of negotiation. Now, I tend to then say, you don't have to become the man. You just have to explain that this is a realistic budget and you're not negotiating on budget. So, but the predicate behind you is that whole sort of dance around getting venture capital is around negotiation. And women tend to see it as a contract and they're very truthful. The other thing is women generally give a great attribution to their team and use the word we, and men use the word I. But we have to invest in the leader. So just that language on using that we and I sort of language, but making sure that you're not dissipating your power is very important. Not so much with me as women, but with my male partners. I tend to have to go in and more or less and interpret a little bit about what might have been at play there. And I think the more women there are in venture capital, the less issue that is. And there's more women in corporate venture capital. So if you go to the side where, say, Janssen in Belgium is an excellent J&J DC or an excellent venture capital, Merck Serono in my area, they tend to be absolutely equal in terms of men and women. And this is less of an issue and there's less of that sort of dynamic. And it's a more transactional discussion. Whereas in the venture capital world I'm in, it tends to be a little testosterone led. That's their problem, not ours.
Absolutely. Mary, I'm sure you will have found that very useful. A fantastic opportunity to ask your question directly to Dr. Prosser there. There's a question in relation to program. I know, Anne, you spoke a little bit already about programs for girls, and there's a question. I actually think I've just lost it, but it was from Sarah Ironside, who was the recipient of the Visible Woman of the Year award given by the Irish Embassy last year. So delighted to know that you're here participating, Sarah. And I think that was your question about programs for young girls.
Yeah, so indeed at BWise we work at different levels. So we have this Girls Leading in Science contest together with Solvay, in which we encourage young girls to participate and to win back their first year of university tuition fee. But also we have at different levels, so also at PhD level, we have the mentoring program. This is especially intended for women in their last year of the PhD, because then often that's like the breaking point when you actually see the leaky pipeline, that women tend to do postdocs less. So that's also a very important step in your career. And there we also offer a mentoring program, but also lunch and learn workshops, in which we build their self-confidence. So related to the negotiation skills, indeed, we also see the same thing, but it even starts at application. We see that women actually, they want to tick all the boxes. And if they don't tick one box, they think, I'm not worth to go for this job. And in men, we don't see this. So we also try to build women's self-confidence through our workshops and lunch and learns with BWise. And they are all open for free. So I would encourage you highly to participate in those and to subscribe to our newsletter. Yeah.
So they're very accessible.
Very accessible. Last week we had one with Dr. Petra Rudolph, physicist from Groningen University, and we had over 50 participants. We got really good comments. So it's like how to proceed for a career in academia and all the steps going from starting a PhD until tenure track.
Okay, thank you. We've got a good few questions here. We have a question in from the Lycée Français students in Brussels. And given we're talking about encouraging young people, this is probably a good one to turn to. They say we're interested in representation, or rather the importance of participation rather than mere representation. Given that the patriarchy is still at large, how to ensure that women's representation is not mere tokenism, and to ensure that women's participation is fully active and not merely entertained by potentially a majority of men. Well, I hope we're showing today that women's participation is fully active. So perhaps, Nora, could we come back to you to start off on this one? The question of ensuring that women's participation is fully active. Is that something that you think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits nicely to what I mentioned earlier in terms of it's not just about visibility, but it's about opening the doors. So it's that, as you said, participation, not just representation. And so, I mean, there are some fantastic initiatives going on all over to, you know, get the participation going. I think even with the Possum 13 initiative, that's really something we've tried to do. It's not just about representation. We have actively opened up participation of opportunities for the younger girls to participate in space science. So they design and they would have their experiment flown on the microgravity flight. So I think we can all do something. That's a group of 13 citizen scientists coming together to do this initiative. Again, like the other panelists have said, there's some amazing initiatives in terms of mentorships and supports. But then I think, even when I talk to younger undergraduates, I say to them, it's up to them to sit in that role model seat and go back to their previous former secondary school and talk to them. So you can constantly keep passing it along.
Thanks a million. And I imagine, Nora, that for you, your career is probably something that is so it's so easy for children to imagine what you do, that perhaps it's easier for them to imagine a career working in space than it might be for them to imagine a career working in a lab, for example.
Possibly. I think, space has such an inspiring theme, as a career. And but equally, I often think, even as you mentioned with my book, like that was 25 years in the making, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. And but I get letters now of like little girls and boys saying that they want to be astronauts and they want to be engineers. And I got a letter off a 9-year-old little girl, and she said, I want to be an aeronautical engineer like you. And I just think how wonderful. Like, I didn't even know what aeronautical engineering was when I was 9. But equally, I think certainly through my time at the International Space University, I have realized the vastness of space careers. So there are so many careers that feed into space and to being an astronaut. So when I'm talking to young people, even if they say I want to be an astronaut, that's brilliant. But even if they don't become an astronaut, I think there are so many STEM subjects on the periphery of astronauts that they might end up doing, astronomy, physics, medicine, science, technology, all of these things. So I think it's getting that kind of seed of interest and then letting them explore and letting them be as Agnes said, as dream big and go big on things. And I think that's really important.
Thank you. And I suppose to return to something that to the interdisciplinarity that we mentioned earlier, there's a question here from Hilary Barry, who is from Lady Agri Impact Investment Hub. And Hilary, we met you last year at this event last year in Brussels, so it's nice to see you back. And Hilary says, curiosity, breaking silos, championing women, and inspiring the younger generation of women. How can we give more visibility to such fantastic role models and ensure that we're networking across sectors, science, medicine, food safety, access for women to knowledge to overcome inequalities? So really, how can we look at starting to knit some of this together across sectors? That's not addressed to anybody in particular. Would one of you like to come in on that? I imagine it's something that everybody is very much behind.
For me at least, neuroscientists, we have a dedicated website. It's called 500 Women in Science. And there you can actually find female role models from different levels, also PhD students, but also professors. So if you're looking for a speaker for a conference or a debate, you can also find women there on 500womeninScience.org.
I think a lot is happening, and it's to use your vote. Vote to attend things where you like the participation and gender and diversity. Acknowledge and comment on things that you think are going well, and be proactive. Start your own interdisciplinary project. It doesn't have to be huge. Just reach out yourself. And if this alone has made you go somewhere you hadn't been before, like I laugh. This time last year, I addressed the NTMA conference around this time last year. And I said, this time next year, you'll all be experts on vaccines. We're talking about our numbers. And, humanity evolves through projects. And, it's up to women. I think in Ireland, we're quite well served by a lot of Carmel Motherskill, a lot of medics. We've had quite strong women involved in the debate. Maybe not as visible, it's not led by a man, but I think certainly from a gender perspective, the fact it's highly populated by women in public health, when there isn't women on the panel, people usually call it out. So I think the COVID may end up being a great interdisciplinary project for us all to celebrate, but no one better than our poet, because I thought, I have to say, Jessica, I hope you publish that or put that up on the web, because that was inspiring. And I think art has a huge part in what we do too, to remind us and embed us and anchor us to what projects are really about in the world.
It was an extraordinary poem, and the reading or performance of it was quite extraordinary. And I imagine that performance will be something that people might well refer to in the future as something that has inspired them. I know that I've got one eye on the clock. I make it about 12:30 in Ireland, 1:30 for you. So I will just perhaps we have time for one more question. And I know that we have already looked at the idea of role models or people who have inspired or empowered you. Perhaps we could also look at people who have given you support a little further along the line. So not necessarily a teacher, but somebody who has perhaps entered your life at a key point. And this really comes from a question which has come from a participant who's from the Kosovo embassy, and some nice complimentary remarks for all of you panelists, which we will share with you afterwards. But the main question is, who was a woman, perhaps, who has inspired and empowered you, or that keeps inspiring you in your life and your work? So perhaps we could ask each of you in turn to answer that question, just as a nice way of rounding things off. So will we go to you first, Nora?
Sure, yeah. It's always hard to pick one, because I do think it is that thing at the different stages in our careers. We probably need different things as well. But I would remark on Angie Buckley. She was the dean at ISU, at the International Space University, back in 2010 when I participated in the Space Studies program. And, for me, that was a point where I was just finishing off my PhD. I was like quite lost, and I was like really wanting to get into the whole space area. And Angie really facilitated my continued participation in the Space Studies program the next year. And I really think if that didn't happen, how much more difficult it would have been for me to try and pave this space career. So I certainly am thankful for her role at that kind of key turning point. So yeah, she is definitely somebody. But as I say, there have been lots of males and females in my life who've been amazing mentors and friends to me. So it's very hard to pick one.
I think you're right, Nora, that sort of post PhD point, or the postdoc point, is certainly a point of vulnerability, I think, for people, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yeah, I've often thought about this myself in terms of, when you're leaving secondary school and going into university, there's a lot of support there in terms of career guidance, and there are open days at universities, and students are welcomed in and they can meet the staff. But then those kind of transitions out of undergrad, and particularly out of PhD, they're very hard. Like, I found myself, I was very lost. I didn't really have a path or a vision as to what I was going to do. So yeah, I think we certainly need to think about more supports for people during those transitions.
And what about you, Anne? Is there? Do you think you can?
Yes.
I mean, I'm
certainly.
sure everybody has points of vulnerability along their career path. Would it have been something similar for you? Were there points at which you wondered which way you were going to go?
Yeah, actually, for me it's a bit the same, because I as for my PhD defense, actually just it was a very long PhD, 7 years. So in the last year, I was doubting to have children, to be honest, because I thought, like, never gonna finish my PhD when I have kids, because then you're in the last phase, the writing phase, right? And I joined BWise, and I got a mentor, amazing person. She was actually the president of BWise, Professor Tatjana Park-Vogt. She's a full professor of chemistry at KU Leuven. And she said, no, you have to go for your children. If you feel it, go for it. Don't postpone it. And actually, I'm so glad I did. I defended my PhD when I was pregnant. So it was really amazing for me. And also, she gave me a lot of advice. Also, after your PhD, go abroad. That's why I ended up in Australia for a postdoc. So all this good advice came from Tatjana. Yeah, she's a really amazing, truly amazing person.
Well, that's wonderful. And also, she's now had a very public acknowledgement, which is very appropriate. So, perhaps we could come to you to finish on. I mean, it sounds like so much of what you do is to do with giving support to other people throughout their careers.
I've had great communities, but I think it's you pick your tribe. I don't think it's one. I think at certain stages I've had groups of men and women around me. Mary Mulvihill, who founded WITS, was a very important part of my life. Unfortunately, she died 5 years ago at the age of 55, which was far too young. But her philosophy, and I think it's not just, it's ethics. It's their people's ethics and values you appreciate it. And then the other piece of advice I got from a very dear friend was, move on. It's not perfect. You make the decision that's the best decision for you at that point in time. You might leave something on the table in terms of what your career could have been, but just move on. Move on. Don't be too hard on yourself.
Well, that's a pretty nice message to end on, I think. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you, Anne van der Jucht, Nora Patton, and Ina Prosser. You have really been, you've brought so much experience and so many insights today, and you have been so generous with your time, and that you've been willing to share what you've discovered along your individual journey. So thank you very, very much for being with us today, and I'm sure all the participants would like to join with me in saying that. So I think that before I'm going to be handing back now to Aisling O'Leary in the embassy, but I would just like to thank Ambassador Nolan and myself for bringing this St. Brigid's Day event together again, for the huge creative energy and dedication that she brings to her role, and the whole team there at the embassy. All of you working for us away from home. We really appreciate it, and thank you so much for all the wheels that you put in motion to make this happen today. Thanks very much, and happy St. Brigid's Day.
Thank you, Antonia, so much for that wonderful moderation, and to all our panelists for a really, I think, really genuine and really open conversation. And it was a really beautiful note to finish on, to talk about the people that have inspired you and lifted you up. And I think, as Ina said, it's about a community of people that do that, and different people at different points in your life. So I think that was a really lovely way to end it. And maybe there are people watching today who'll be inspired by your stories as well. Just before I hand back to Ambassador Nolan, and before our final kind of cultural element for today, we're going to have a bit of old school fun with a raffle. As you signed up over the last couple of days, you've each been assigned a number, and we've got some gorgeous bookish prizes for you. So the first one is The Danger and the Glory, which some of you might already be aware of, was sponsored by the Embassy, and it's an anthology of pieces by Irish writers on the art of writing and how they write and how they live their writing life. And it's edited by Professor Hedwig Schwall of KU Leuven and Ephesus. And related to that then is our second prize, which is Actress by Anne Enright, which Anne is the current subject of a project by Ephesus, a translation project by Ephesus. So that links in nicely with our first prize. Then we have a copy of The Ideal Diplomat by Anne-Marie O'Brien, which is a gorgeous look back on a period between 1946 and 1990 of Irish women in the diplomatic service in the Department of Foreign Affairs. And lastly, a nice fun one, we have Irish Folk and Fairy Tales. So we've got 4 winners. I'm going to pull 4 numbers now. I feel like I should have a tumbling tombola thing, but next time. So I pulled out 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Anna's ticking off the names as we go, and we'll give you an email this afternoon to let you know how we can get your book post to you. And as a little segue, just to remind anyone that might be interested in our Embassy Book Club, all the information's on our website, and we get through quite a lot, so do join us. And I'll pass you back now to Ambassador Nolan for some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Aisling. Very well done. Yeah, wonderful moderating and wonderful contribution from our panelists, and lovely to see all the fabulous engagement with our participants. I really appreciated the intersection of the arts with the discussion. I thought that was wonderful, and great to see the love for the poetry and for Jessica. Jessica has 2 collections out, Liffey Swim and The Quick, and we'll put up details of those for those of you who want to see more of her work. But also just Google her, because she's everywhere. She's fantastic, and yeah, definitely life is better with poems. So thank you so much. Well done to our raffle winners. I hope you enjoy those great reads. Books bring people together, so we love to add some books into the mix. I think that was a really enjoyable, interesting and empowering event, and I'm seeing lots of nice messages along those lines coming through from our participants. Many thanks to our performers. Antonia, for your wonderful moderation. You know us so well now, and as you know, everybody here is waiting for, I think it was the film, the TV miniseries, the radio play, all the things that you're going to develop from the wonderful women of history that you have brought back to life for us. They were always there. We just needed to have their great stories uncovered. Really appreciate the enthusiastic involvement from all of our participants. And as a number of people have said, we're so looking forward to when we can see you all and welcome you all in person again. And with the coming of spring and all of the achievements of science and medicine, we know that day is coming. I'd like to say myself a very special thanks to Aisling, and to Anna, Marina, James and Philippe, our small but mighty team at the Embassy, for all of their creativity and their hard work, not just today, but every day. And what you won't have seen behind the scenes, because it's all been seamless, is they've all been beavering away, making this magic happen. And I think I was probably the only one who made a few technological mistakes, but they won't be surprised by that. So I think we've all learned a lot today. We've learned from doing our first big Zoom webinar, and it's been great. So I hope we'll get to do lots more. And it's been wonderful to see the engagement from all around the world. We've learned, though, from the lessons of history. I think we've been inspired by the role models, both from the past and from the present. And now we want to end with thinking a little bit about the potential for the future. Many of you will remember Katie Maye from our 2019 event here in Beaux-Arts, when she sang again an original composition on what the achievement of Irish independence and also the vote for women, women's suffrage meant and means for her and for her generation. And I think when you hear the song, you'll agree that with young women like Katie finding and really expressing their voices, that legacy of Brigid that we've been talking about, and the future of her values, of creativity, of compassion, of community, those values are indeed safe with the young generation, the coming generation. So our concluding song, Days, is written and performed by the wonderful Katie Maye, and I get a chance to say, roll it. Thank you.
I could fly. If I wanted, I could take control and reach up to the sky. I could swim deep into the ocean just to see what's held within. I could save a life if it's in a lab or on a ward in hospital at night. I know I could do it all, 'cause I've seen women go before me, standing proud and tall. From science right to medicine, the list of influential women I could write about will go for days, days. And I'll be up at dawn with my gloves on and my mask up, ready to help the world move on. From science right to medicine, the list of influential women I could write about will go for days, days. To be the best that we can be, women in every field of work is what we need. And I have faith we'll soon be there. We help keep this world turning, recognition's only fair. So thank you to everyone who strives to work towards a better world and keep us all alive. From science right to medicine, the list of influential women I could write about will go for days, days. There's a reason that we are together celebrating these women and the work they do today. So happy St. Brigid's Day.